It is a critical premise of freedom of speech that we do not honor the dishonorable when we open our public forum to their voices. To hold otherwise would make vigorous debate impossible. Second, to those who believe that this event should never have happened, that it is inappropriate for the university to conduct such an event, I want to say that I understand your perspective and respect it as reasonable. The scope of free speech and academic freedom should itself always be open to further debate. As one of the more famous quotations about free speech goes, it is an experiment, as all life is an experiment. I want to say, however, as forcefully as I can, that this is the right thing to do, and indeed it is required by the existing norms of free speech, the American university, and Columbia itself. Third, to those among us who experience hurt and pain as a result of this day, I say on behalf of all of us that we are sorry and wish to do what we can to alleviate it. Fourth, to be clear on another matter, this event has nothing whatsoever to do with any rights of the speaker, but only with our rights to listen and speak. We do it for ourselves. We do it in the great tradition of openness that has defined this nation for many decades now. We need to understand the world we live in, neither neglecting its glories nor shrinking from its threats and dangers. It is inconsistent with the idea that one should know thine enemies. It is consistent with the idea that one should know thine enemies, to have the intellectual and emotional courage to confront the mind of evil and to prepare ourselves to act with the right temperament. In the moment, the arguments for free speech will never seem to match the power of the arguments against. But what we must remember is that this is precisely because free speech asks us to exercise extraordinary self-restraint against the very natural but often counterproductive impulses that lead us to retreat from engagement with ideas we dislike and fear. In this lies the genius of the American idea of free speech. Lastly, in universities, we have a deep and almost single-minded commitment to pursue the truth. We do not have access to the levers of power. We cannot make war or peace. We can only make minds. And to do this, we must have the most fulsome freedom of inquiry. Let me now turn to Mr. Ahmadinejad. First, on the brutal crackdown on scholars, journalists, and human rights advocates. Over the past 2 weeks, your government has released Dr. Hala Esfandiari and Parnaz Agzima, and just 2 days ago, Kian Tagbash, a graduate of Columbia with a PhD in urban planning. While our community is relieved to learn of his release on bail, Dr. Tagbash remains in Tehran under house arrest, and he still does not know whether he will be charged with a crime or allowed to leave the country. Let me say this for the record. I call on the President today to ensure that Kian will be free to travel out of Iran as he wishes. Let me also report today that we are extending an offer to Kian to join our faculty as a visiting professor in urban planning here at his alma mater in our Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, and we hope he will be able to join us next semester. The arrest and imprisonment of these Iranian Americans for no good reason is not only unjustified, it runs completely counter to the very values that allow today's speaker to even appear on this campus. But at least they are alive. According to Amnesty International, 210 people have been executed in Iran so far this year, 21 of them on the morning of September 5th alone. This annual total includes at least 2 children, further proof, as Human Rights Watch puts it, that Iran leads the world in executing minors. There is more. Iran hanged up to 30 people this past July and August during a widely reported suppression of efforts to establish a more democratic society. Many of these executions were carried out in public view, a violation of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights to which Iran is a party. These executions and others have coincided with a wider crackdown on student activists and academics accused of trying to foment a so-called soft revolution. This has included jailing and forced retirement of scholars. As Dr. Esfandiari said in a broadcast interview since her release, she was held in solitary confinement for 105 days because the government believes that the United States is planning a velvet revolution in Iran. In this very room, last year we learned something about velvet revolutions from Václav Havel, and we will likely hear the same from our World Leaders Forum speaker this evening, President Michelle Bachelet of Chile. Both of their extraordinary stories remind us that there are not enough prisons to prevent an entire society that wants its freedom from achieving it. We at this university have not been shy to protest the challenge the failures of our own government to live by our values, and we won't be shy about criticizing yours. Let's then be clear at the beginning. Mr. President, you exhibit all the signs of a petty and cruel dictator. And so I ask you, why have women, members of the Baha'i faith, homosexuals, and so many of our academic colleagues become targets of persecution in your country? Why, in a letter last week to the Secretary General of the UN, did Akbar Ganji, Iran's leading political dissident, and over 300 public intellectuals, writers and Nobel laureates express such grave concern that your inflamed dispute with the West is distracting the world's attention from the intolerable conditions in your regime within Iran? In particular, the use of the press law to ban writers for criticizing the ruling system. Why are you so afraid of Iranian citizens expressing their opinions for change? In our country, you are interviewed by our press and asked to speak here today. And while my colleagues at the law school, Michael Dorf, one of my colleagues, spoke to Radio Free Europe viewers in Iran a short while ago on the tenets of freedom of speech in this country, I propose further that you let me lead a delegation of students and faculty from Columbia to address your universities about free speech with the same freedom we afford you today. Secondly, the denial of the Holocaust. In a December 2005 state television broadcast, you described the Holocaust as a fabricated legend. 1 year later, you held a 2-day conference of Holocaust deniers. For the illiterate and ignorant, this is dangerous propaganda. When you come to a place like this makes you quite simply ridiculous. You are either brazenly provocative or astonishingly uneducated. You should know, please, you should know that Columbia is the World Center of Jewish Studies, is a world center, and now in partnership with the Evo Institute of Holocaust Studies. Since the 1930s, we provided an intellectual home for countless Holocaust refugees and survivors and their children and grandchildren. The truth is that the Holocaust is the most documented event in human history. Because of this and for many other reasons, your absurd comments about the debate over the Holocaust both defy historical truth and make all of us who continue to fear humanity's capacity for evil shudder at this closure of memory, which is always virtue's first line of defense. Will you cease this outrage? The destruction of Israel. 12 days ago, you said that the state of Israel cannot continue its life. This echoed a number of inflammatory statements you have delivered in the past 2 years, including in October 2005 when you said that Israel should be wiped off the map, quote unquote. Columbia has over 800 alumni currently living in Israel. As an institution, we have deep ties with our colleagues there. I have spoken out in most forceful terms against proposals to boycott Israeli scholars and universities, saying that such boycotts might as well include Columbia. More than 400 college and university presidents in this country have joined in that statement. My question then is, do you plan on wiping us off the map too? Funding terrorism. According to reports of the Council on Foreign Relations, it's well documented that Iran is a state sponsor of terror, that funds such violent groups as Lebanese Hezbollah, which Iran helped organize in the 1980s, Palestinian Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. While your predecessor government was instrumental in providing the U.S. with intelligence and base support in the 2001 campaign against the Taliban in Afghanistan, your government is now undermining American troops in Iraq by funding, arming, and providing safe transit to insurgent leaders like Muqtada al-Sadr and his forces.